Can you hear me now? I changed mics. Oop. Your message was blank. New message. Oh, yes. Yay. Okay, great. Wow. Well, then let me just rewind here. Hang on. Let me get back to my slides. I've done that before with this microphone. Dang it. All right. So people are going to we'll have to cut off the first 7 minutes of me jabbering about nothing you guys could hear. Okay. So from the start here, we are taking a look at moods and hormones because it's been a huge theme coming into my office lately. And with teen girls, with moms, with stress, with anxiety, with depression, and what a lot of basically Western medicine has taught us to do is to put things underneath a microscope and really take a microscopic look at just the thyroid or just the ovaries or just the uterus or just the blood, just the hormones. And what I've found is that there's a big lack of understanding of what's going on globally inside of our body to really know what you have to do or what you should do next to make that body get back into harmony and support your own hormone process. Because there's often, or an easy way that we find is to have a quick fix and say, let's add in this progesterone cream, which we're going to talk about progesterone. Let's add in this estrogen. Let's put you on, these birth control tablets with artificial hormones to try to support a process that should be working on its own. So what we're going to take a look at is a 30,000 foot view of what's actually happening, what's going on in the body. That way, when we start to understand things better, we know what to do and we know what to say yes to, we know what to say no to, and we can start to understand how things are balanced out naturally, because really the process should happen naturally, unless we've already, started to lose, you might have a missing female body part. And at that case, we do have that happen and things are going to be a little wonky, during that time as well. But whether you're a woman that's having mood swings, weight gain, water retention, sleeping difficulties, anxiety, depression, you might be trying to get pregnant or not wanting to be pregnant anymore, and you don't want any unexpected surprises. This is a good thing to understand with what's going on globally. And then we're going to really start to hone down into what's going on internally. So that way you've got just a big picture view and can make some better choices. If you are struggling with hormones, which I found is so crazy often, and the answers that patients are given aren't necessarily congruent with our method of thinking, and in time will start to expire, or we need more meds, or we need, a better fix, a different fix. We got to try something else to trick the body instead of figuring out how to get that body to be supported the way that it needs to be supported. And there is some pretty big players in this picture that we're going to talk about, from the brain to thyroid and pituitary gland that's up in that area, and also your hormone lady parts, as well as your liver, which is a big one here. So ultimately, your brain is what's in control. Your brain is what makes all the shots. It calls all the shots. It decides what's going on, but it's got to get feedback from your lady parts and everywhere else in your body, really. It's got to get feedback, and it has to know what it needs to do, because we'll often see an overproduction of one hormone and an underproduction of another, and a ratio that's off. And women are like, oh my gosh, this is so challenging. I don't know what to do about it. This is overwhelming. I don't understand why. So let's break this down and look at how the brain starts calling the shots and where it gets the information from, and why the hormones or your blood chemistry might be off, if it is, or some people have done saliva tests too to look and see at some of their imbalances. So there's a couple different ways that your brain does get feedback that we'll chat about and help you start to understand and digest a little bit more. But this slide I probably use, this is where I was, I apologize, when we didn't have the audio. But this slide, I had a lot of just, I guess, light bulbs go off when I saw it that said you live your life through your nervous system. And you really hadn't thought about that, but everything you think, everything you say, everything you do, every emotion that's processed has to be filtered through that nervous system. And what happens is you start becoming you through that process. And we'll have people sit in the same environment. I'm sure you guys have been here before, where you can all be in the same exact environment. And there are people that are excited. There's people that are sad. There's people that are anxious. There's people that might be angry. We have all sorts of things going on. Some people might think that food's delicious and some might think it's disgusting. We have our own little nervous systems that our body is processing the world through. And it has to get feedback from that spinal cord, which we're going to talk about momentarily as well. And it's kind of like your direct connection. So the way we can break it down is your brain is going to get influence directly from its world, from its senses, from everything that you're doing, from balance and motor movement, how it feeds the brain. And then it also gets feedback, we call it through the blood, cholinergic, how it's going to influence the brain directly. And that's more of your Wi-Fi. So if you've got hardwiring as the Ethernet and Wi-Fi is that blood chemistry that it's being influenced through, and people get really, really focused on that blood chemistry and try to alter that instead of understanding big picture of what your brain's doing and what that pituitary, or if you guys have heard of HPA axis, what that thing is doing, instead of, microscopically looking at maybe estrogen and progesterone and trying to alter things there. So I had found this picture when I was looking through and reading some research articles about, some of the later research about what's going on with hormone cycles and what we're finding might be interfering with it and disrupting it, which I'm going to chat about here in a little bit. But I looked at this hormone cycle, and this photo just kind of said it all. When I saw that, I was like, every 28 days, baby, this just happens over and over and over and over again. And, when I was chatting before about natural family planning, or that might've been when my mic was off, this is really important to understand what's going on here when you are doing natural family planning as well, or if you are on a hormone supplement such as a copper ring or maybe a birth control patch or tablets, to understand that this isn't going to look like this, but this is the way we want it to look when you're not expecting. And you can see estrogen and progesterone, which are two of the big players in here that I'm going to chat most about, of how big of swings we go through with them and how inversely proportional they can be. And unfortunately, how we can be off just in a ratio where it looks like things are estrogen dominant, and it's because we don't have enough progesterone and the ratio is gone. And we might not even have enough progesterone. Wow, this is gonna be a long night if I can't talk progesterone either. And looking at that balance and really understanding how the brain is triggering the ovaries to be releasing that kind of substance into the blood, and how that balance can really get off, and what happens, down the road in long term, what's going on inside of our body. Because there's some people that are very acutely having irregularities with their hormones, and then there's some people that this is chronic, long term. We're into the third layer, which we're going to look at of stress, that's really starting to throw us off. And we have a lot more to dissect when we get to that third layer of stress instead of the outermost one. Dr. Bruce Lipton. So I love this man. And if you've ever read The Biology of Belief, or if you guys are into Joe Dispenza, or people that talk about the way that we can help calm our brain, these people are brilliant. They're amazing. Dr. Bruce Lipton was one of the highly awarded scientists that had found out that really it's not so much our genes, because we blame genes all the time. We've got a breast cancer gene in our body. We should just, be Angelina Jolie and take the breasts off, instead of really start to pay attention to what we're doing environmentally. So epigenetics is what he discovered. There's our environmental factors that are turning genes on. So we might have been dealt a hand in our lives, and it's really how we play those cards that matters. And the environment is huge. It can turn genes on and it can turn genes off. And there is research on both sides of that to look and see how genetic composition can start to play into things and how we can turn those genes on, unfortunately, like the negative way. And then also ways we can repair and heal, and they do turn off. So I'm not going to get into, the deep, dark science of that, but I feel like it's really encouraging because sometimes we think our genes are a death sentence. My mom had ovarian cancer and my grandma had ovarian cancer. So I'm definitely going to get ovarian cancer type of mindset, instead of knowing I can take care of my body, knowing that might be a risk factor, which we all have, but that might be a huge risk factor for me. And I'm going to make sure I keep my body healthy and balanced. And he had wrote this quote that said, the function of our nervous system, which is how our brain and body talk to every single organ, cell, and gland inside of our body and release that chemistry back to the brain. That the function of that nervous system is to perceive its environment. So both externally, what's going on around you, temperature, is there a threat, what's happening, where do I need to go, balance wise, where am I at, but also internal environment. That's a huge one. That's what we're talking a lot about tonight, is internally, what's going on, what did I eat, hormone balance, what's happening. And it's going to coordinate everything. Every little function has to be coordinated through that nervous system. This is primary. And then secondary is what's going on inside of that blood, but it's going to coordinate the behavior of all of those cells, including your pituitary gland, your hypothalamus, your thyroid, your girl parts, and everything that needs to be in beautiful, perfect harmony. So I'd suggest you guys look into that, man, if you haven't, because, or Joe Dispenza, who I really love too, who talk a lot about calming that brain down and a lot about really great biology. And it's super encouraging, especially if you're on the verge of thinking, you've got some sort of death sentence with your genes or what might be going on around you or the past trauma that you've had, to take a look at rewiring yourself and letting it be a healthy connection there. So your nervous system's got two modes of operation. Where we want it is nice and balanced, kind of like we want our hormones, although they look like this. We want to feel nice and calm while we are seated and at rest. While I'm here, while you're listening, we want you calm. We don't want you hearing information and stuck in fight or flight. So that is a really an inborn innate response to stress. Nor do we want you actually healing, resting, and digesting or repairing while you're awake during the day. We want your nervous system balanced. And unfortunately, what we see is these two different modes that are inversely proportional, which I'll show you on the next slide, start to play and wreak havoc on our body. And stress, of course, we know is our number one thing. So if we're going to take a look at it, I always say choose your stress wisely. But if we're going to take a look at what stress does to the body, it is the number one thing that's going to cause cardiovascular disease, strokes, heart attacks, cancers. Stress interferes with our life cycle. And stress can be constructive. We can have good, healthy stress to challenge the body, but it becomes destructive in many different ways and many different components, which I'm going to talk about next. And let me just explain to you what happens with your body under stress, because some people might say, well, I don't feel stressed. I'll get that comment a lot. I don't feel stressed. But if you're having a hormone imbalance, your body feels stressed. So there's 300 trillion bits of information that go to your brain every single second. You're consciously aware of 50 of those. So there are people so often saying, I don't feel stressed. Guess what? Not to be, the Debbie Downer or the bearer of bad news. You've got to pay attention to it, because sometimes we just will disassociate with feeling stressed and try to push it aside instead of be able to handle it and process it and release it. Because when we start to build up stress and we don't feel the stress, then it's stuck inside of our body and it becomes a really bad baggage that we start to carry around, and it really doesn't do great things for us. There's when you're going through something stressful, so say you're having an argument with your spouse tonight, there's gonna be about 1,200 chemicals that get dumped throughout your body. Your body is now in survival mode. The heart rate increases, blood pressure goes up, your blood gets shunted from your internal organs, so all the lady parts, out to the limbs to fight or flee. Your senses are going to turn up, like touch. Your taste will go down, digestion goes down, hearing's going to go up. You're ready to fight an enemy. This is a beautiful thing when you do need to fight, when your life is at risk, when there is a bear that pops out, when you do need to win an argument with somebody, that fight or flight response is great. But when we get stuck there, when we have more stress than we can handle, more stress that we can heal and repair from, is when our body starts to lose function. And that's really where I'll start to see women looking at a hormone cycle that's been off. We know cortisol gets kicked up when we're under stress. We know adrenaline goes up. We know that the adrenal glands sitting on top of your kidneys are pumping adrenaline back to the brain. The brain just wants sugar to feed on. If you remember, sugar doesn't need insulin to cross over that blood-brain barrier. It's an instant hit to the brain because your brain's ready. It needs to handle whatever stressful thought, whatever threat is in front of them. Your brain needs the superpower to do it. And it's going to hang on to fat. It's not going to digest things because it doesn't know when it's going to get its next meal. It can't digest nutrients appropriately when it is under stress. And unfortunately, we hit that cycle over and over and over again. And we start getting hardwired for stress. We're like, oh, that's just my life. I'm just so stressed. And we just got so much to do. And we're so busy. And I'm taking this kid this way. And they got dance lessons, they got karate, and we've got piano, and we've got school, and we've got masks, and we've got all these things, online school. We're sitting too long, blah, blah, blah. And there's just stress. And our body is pretty soon just hanging on to it. And what it doesn't care about at that time, it cares about survival. That's the only thing it cares about. It doesn't care about making a beautiful, lovely cycle for you to carry a baby. It doesn't want to carry a baby and grow an infant when you're under stress and barely surviving. It absolutely doesn't want it. And there's times when we just don't even, like I was saying, people say, I don't feel stressed. There's so much stress, internal stress that we can measure. We measure it on our scans and we'll look and see, okay, we've got a layer of stress that's going on that's been stuck inside your body, your nervous system, your spinal cord, that hardwiring to your brain. That remembers literally everything. It doesn't go anywhere. That's your database for your computer. That's what runs the show, and it knows what to do. You might say, I don't remember that happening, or, I didn't know I reacted that way. Your nervous system does. Your nervous system remembers how it reacted because it's got to remember it for next time. It's an efficient system. It doesn't want to relearn it. So it's just going to hang on to that and be ready. Like, I got to be on edge because I got to be ready for this next threat that's coming my way. And it doesn't sleep well because it's inversely proportional. This parasympathetic nervous system should be there when you're sleeping at night, when you're healing and repairing from the stress of the day, when you're digesting, when you're growing. All of the repair happens at night. If you've read anything on sleep, and you may not like to read books like I do, but the book of Why We Sleep talks a lot about, you might exercise one day or during the day, and it's not in that workout that you're getting healthy and strong. It's repairing from that workout. It's those neural connections that your brain is making. It's that movement pattern. That's how you learn things, is at night. Your brain will go through things at about a quarter of the speed that it did during the day, so it can make those neural pathways. And what we don't want it to do is be under a neural pathway for stress. We want it to be able to be full on parasympathetic, healing from the stress of the day at night. That's where the magic happens. That's where your body can reproduce the hormones that it needs to. That's where your body can replenish, uterine lining and the hormones that need to be there, and the food that you ate and the day that you had. But they're very, very It's very, very important. I don't know if you can really see this slide. It probably depends on the device that you're looking at, but this one's really helpful when you're looking at how inversely proportional that sympathetic nervous system is to the parasympathetic nervous system. Those two oppositions make a really big contrast, but they make a really big deal, and they can't be on at the same time. You can even watch, fight or flight compared to resting, healing, and digesting. You don't want to be stuck in either one for too long. This one will exhaust you, and this one you're already exhausted when we do measure it on our scan. So when you're looking over here, your sympathetic nervous system and all of what it does compared to your parasympathetic nervous system, It's a pretty big deal, from kicking out adrenaline to having your liver be overwhelmed with bile and being able to digest food. Things are turned down digestively, stomach, and things are turned up, lungs, bladder. So I don't know if I can make that picture any bigger for you, but I can also share my slides with you guys because I've got some other hormones that you might want to take a look at as well that are pretty important and how they play a role into this. But one thing I want you to take a look at is that hard wiring into the spinal cord. You can see your sympathetic nervous system has a lot of areas that hardwire in compared to your parasympathetic. There's just a few up in the cranium and the cranial nerves, this ginormous nerve here that we're going to talk about in a little bit with one big, Ethernet cord, and then bladder and pelvis, which is down in that lower sacrum and it has its own control center. And both of those are a pretty big deal when we're talking about female hormones, which is also why it's really important in our office to measure that and see just how your body feels internally. And yes, we can measure it, which is really cool. This next slide talks about how much we start to feed that stress cycle. So the big red word in the center is what we take care of in our office, which is neurological interference that might be interfering with that hardwiring from your brain to your body and not letting that cholinergic or that blood chemistry be right. Because if you remember, the brain has to be that primary control, the HPA axis, to talk to the lady parts that are going to start to release hormones back to the brain and back to all the other body parts to say, this is what we're supposed to do, friends. That big red word there, it's called subluxation. That means stress that's been stuck. But what we want to look at is what might be feeding that stress response. So I just talked about an argument. I talked about, you're taking your kids 1,000 places, what we're dealing with right now in our nation and in our country. There is a lot happening, especially emotionally, in our lives. And you can see that. But we also have to understand that whether we are in that stressful event, so we are in that argument with someone, we are thinking about that, like, oh man, I wish I would have said that to that person that, said this to me, blah, blah, blah. And you're thinking about it, your brain responds exactly the same. It is going to kick out the same hormones, whether you are there in that incident or whether you are thinking about that incident. It's a perpetual cycle of stress because your brain doesn't know. It just has to say, hey, I need to be ready to go to respond. And if you remember, again, your body grows a beautiful hormone cycle when it's in harmony and balance and not when it's feeling emotional stress. It doesn't want to carry a baby, which you have to remember. That's why we have a hormone cycle, is for reproduction. And chemical stress, which is a big deal when we're talking about endocrine disruptors. So endocrine meaning your hormone cycle and things that get in the way, and chemicals are a really big deal. I'm going to list off a couple of them. Some you might know and some you might not know about, to pay attention to, especially when you're on edge with hormones right now. If you've got an irregular hormone cycle, you're going to really want to pay attention to these toxins and what's going on in your life, and of course the emotional component of this. And then physical stress. Some people think physical stress is an injury, like you might have an injury to your pelvis that might be affecting your uterus and ovaries and bladder, or you might think of physical stress is falling or getting in a car accident, things like that. But really, that is a trauma. But physical stress of stagnation, just not moving your body, is actually worse. So you sitting in a chair all day or on a couch all day and not moving your body and not giving feedback to your brain, which is how your brain is fed, is through movement, electrical impulses from your muscles. 60% of that comes from your spine. So it's important to move your spine. I know with people like Nikki's a yogi, she would vouch for that. You're as young as your spine is flexible. We can all imagine people who might be elderly or somebody that's just kind of hunkered over and they move really slow. Internally, they're moving slow. Externally, they're moving slow. Their brain's not getting feedback. Everything slows down. So moving your body is so, so important in relieving stress, because if we just hang on to that stress and we don't have an outlet, it's a pretty big deal. Yes, we should move our spines in all ways every day, literally. I think you do kid yoga too, which is so cute, and your kids need to do this too. But that non-movement is actually worse. Your brain doesn't get feedback. And we know there's stagnation in our menstrual cycle when we start to have really nasty, sloughing off of the layers and dark blood and clots and, the skin and the chunks that'll happen. That's from stagnation as well, and the brain not getting the feedback that it needs. So making sure that you pay attention to those three components is a pretty big deal. Oh, this is my scan that I was talking about earlier to understand for you guys how we know internally what might be going on in somebody's body. This is a graph, and it looks at just how far somebody might be stuck into the sympathetic nervous system, or at rest. This test is taken at rest, or stuck in parasympathetic, which we don't want you in either. We really want you to feel balanced between those two during the day while you're just seated at rest with no stimulation. This person was shifted off the line, so I don't know if you can barely see that dot, but stuck into fight or flight, not quite up in this green box where they're working with a lower energy charge. So up here in this left-hand corner, we call this the uptight zone, and we can actually, we can usually tell with the irritable people when they come in. We're really excited for them to start to relieve some of that stress in their system when they are getting adjusted, to help with that hard wiring, to calm that brain down. This is pretty important. There's a lot of things that are restricted with that hard wiring, not just hormones, but we can usually tell you're in this uptight zone and things just aren't quite right. And we also have this exhausted zone over here where you've been in fight or flight for such a long time that it's kind of given up and said, I can't do this anymore. Someone cut the brakes. I've been on this gas pedal and nonstop, go, 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 whether it's in your brain or physically or emotionally. You've been stuck there for too long, and you move over here into the exhausted zone. So typically, and this is not always, but this is usually what I see with women that come in my office, and the high and uptight zone are usually the hormone cycle is off, the irritability is there, the anxiety is there, some depression can be there. But when we start to move over here to exhaustion, this is usually my infertility land. So if you're somebody that's struggling with infertility, this is usually where we see you as well, where your body's been in stress for so long that it's unable to even ovulate at times, or even have a really nice uterine lining at times to be able to grow an infant. And this can be really devastating, really, really devastating for women that are trying over and over again and hoping, and praying for that child. So it's a pretty big deal when we look at this internally to know, what do we need to do about it? Really, what can we do? What external factors can we look at that we need to change in your life? But that hard wiring, how much of it needs to be helped out? Because what will happen is we have something called dysautonomia this leads to. And you may or may not have heard this word. Once again, Western medicine has started to pick up on this word as well. Dysautonomia. It means your autonomic nervous system is not functioning well. There's a dysfunction there. They're actually building whole wings of hospitals for dysautonomia. And it's kind of like the patients are like, we don't really know what's going on. It's chronic stress is what it is. And what the three systems outside of your brain, so your brain being that number one, if you remember, the primary control of all things and hormones, when your brain has been under stress for a long enough time, it is always sucking energy. I should say this. It is always sucking energy. It takes about 25% of oxygen and nutrients. I mean, I think even sometimes 50% of oxygen, depending on what you're doing. It is a huge energy suck. Huge. That's why some of your days that you use your brain, you're more tired than when you've, maybe run 15 miles. Your brain's really important for that. Then your digestive system is the next energy suck. Your immune system, and third layer is typically endocrine. So often when patients come in, they will have some sort of imbalance with all three of these areas. So we're not able to digest nutrients appropriately. There might be some leaky gut things going on, some inflammation that's happening. The immune system might be off, whether we're looking at autoimmune or a body that's having a difficult time fighting off infections internally. Maybe it might have a problem just even fighting off a virus. I'm actually doing an immune webinar, or not a webinar, it's in person. It's called Kick the Sick, for people that have some immune struggles that we're going to chat about next week on the 19th. And then endocrine is your hormones. And we will see a pretty big hit here when we get down to this third layer, when it isn't just an acute stressor that's going on. It's just not your body saying, I'm acutely under the short amount of stress and my body, my hormones are off. Instead, when we have a disruption in this endocrine cycle, this is chronic stress that's been there for so long, whether you're aware of it or not, it's what's been built up inside of our body. And we need to get rid of it. Well, stress, it would just be a beautiful thing if stress could just disappear, right? I would just love that. But it's got to dissipate. Our body has to work through it, just like it does for a weight loss program, just like it does for an exercise program. It's got to be able to work through that stress and get stronger for it. I had found this slide when I was searching for a good way to start to describe things for people. And I wanted it all on one page, because when you read through this list of low and high estrogen and low and high progesterone, which are some of these two players with your endocrine cycle that becomes off, and those two big swings, especially in the second part of your menstrual cycle, people can look at this and say, I have all of this, or I have some of this, or I have high and low estrogen, or I have high and low progesterone. This seems really weird. What's going on? And typically it's the ratio that's off. That's why I always warn people, you might have such low amounts of estrogen, but also really, really low amounts of progesterone, that your estrogen seems high, but it's proportionately, because estrogen and progesterone are inversely proportional, and progesterone actually counterbalances estrogen effects. So you might say, oh my gosh, I have all these things. My estrogen is low and my progesterone is low, but I appear estrogen dominant. I've got the PMS, the fibroids, endometriosis, breast lumps, swollen breast, fibrocystic breast, we got breast cancer, infertility, hip fat, weight gain, cellulite, water retention. And this is also the moods and irritability that starts to happen, migraine, headaches, anxiety, all of the things that are on here. And then they look over here and say, but I also have memory loss and hot flashes or fatigue and mood swings and incontinence, muscle loss, sagging skin, no libido, and infertility. And you're like, how can I have high and low estrogen? It's because overall your estrogen is low and it hasn't been taken over. Progesterone, you also don't have enough progesterone, and your estrogen appears to be really, really high and dominant. And that means we need support on both ends of that. And typically it's up in that pituitary gland and your hypothalamus, which is the primary one. So here those two are again. So estrogen, progesterone, and you don't really need to know much about this slide other than the brain and the pelvis talking to each other and how much it does. So when you're looking at your hypothalamus, talking to your anterior to pituitary, talking to the ovaries and the follicles and the uterus and all the things that need to happen under control, or to have a nice control of your hormone balance, people get really overwhelmed. Looking at all these slides, you guys are probably like, oh my God, I don't understand. Like, there's so much happening. What you need to understand is that when that primary control center is off in the brain, because typically that hard wiring is off, and I'll show you just what I'm talking about here in a moment, or towards the end, I guess, of this, where I can really start to explain how your body starts to heal from this stuff. We will start to see people, saying, oh my gosh, I have to go to this specialist and this hormone specialist, and I have to try this med and this drug, or maybe this supplement and this herb. And it gets really, really overwhelming because you don't know maybe what helped it. You don't know that your estrogen, you seem estrogen dominant, yet you don't have enough estrogen. So why would you add estrogen, right? And so since you're low on progesterone, you should just add a progesterone cream. And really that's super dangerous, by the way. Progesterone creams, they typically have you put it on areas of no fat, like on your wrists, because it gets stored in the fat. It also gets transferred to other people when you touch them. It can really be a dangerous thing. And when you're adding a hormone into your life, instead of letting your body balance that out on its own, it can get really tricky. It can feel great for a while and start helping with maybe the estrogen dominance. But since you already have low estrogen overall, and that progesterone starts playing on the top of it, now we have a bigger cyclical problem going on, and your brain doesn't know how to get feedback. And one of the other big players into all of this is your liver, which I'll chat about here in just a moment, because it's got to get rid of extra estrogen, because that can also be stored inside of our body. I had pulled this slide up as well, where you can see estrogen and progesterone effects and just how completely opposite they are. Builds up uterine lining, maintains it, increases body fat, helps us use fat to burn for energy. Depression, migraine, headaches. Progesterone is an antidepressant. Interferes with thyroid, facilitates thyroid, right? Blood clot, normalizes blood, decreased libido. I mean, there's so many things when you're looking at blood sugar, endometrial cancers, and the reduction or protection from it, breast cancer, protection from breast cancer. It seems super logical to just add in progesterone instead of looking at the actual issues that are at hand, because long-term, it can cause some pretty big imbalances and some pretty big problems that we'll start to see in our lives, although it would feel like a really quick fix to something, because when you're looking at this slide, you're like, oh my gosh, look at all these things as a diuretic. It has anti-anxiety in it. It helps with libido. My husband's been complaining, blood sugars and my cravings and my metabolism. I'm retaining all this weight. Pump all of the progesterone into me. And I would really, really encourage you not to, and instead to take a look at, number one, chemicals that might be interfering with the progesterone uptake. So if you've heard of endocrine disruptors before in your life, this is something really, really important to pay attention to. And one of the things that I was taking a look at when I was reading a couple research articles about this. And by the way, just side note, one of them was about rats and how they can stress rats, and looking directly at a stressed rat and the thickness of the uterine lining and like free estrogen, and that restriction that when you feel as stress, that uptake of estrogen in the blood. I mean, it's just crazy. I didn't do the experiment on rats. I just read on the experiment with rats, but apparently they have really close cycles to us. And I just thought that was fascinating, where all they did was just stress the rat. They didn't change anything else dietarily. They didn't add toxins into its life. It was literally just stressing the rat. And I don't know what they do to stress a rat. I didn't ask. I'm not really sure how you stress a rat. But it was really kind of crazy to look at. Just the beautiful lining of their uterus was different, and the estrogen free floating and throughout their body was different from stress alone, and kept their diet and chemicals the same. But progesterone blockers, when you're looking at what might interfere with progesterone, so many chemicals do that they're finding. And I was finding this in actually medical journals, which I thought was pretty great to see that they were able to, realize exactly what's happening in our system and in our lives and our bodies. And endocrine disruptors, I'm getting a little bit microscopic with the fact that it blocks progesterone. They do a lot of crap. These chemicals do a lot of crap in our body. It is one of those feeders of that stress response. That chemical stressor, along with physical and emotional, can play a pretty big role. And the number one endocrine disruptor that was listed was BPA. So if you've started to see like BPA free and plastics and paying attention to that, I thought this statistic was wild. And once again, I found this in a medical journal that in 2012, 9.5 trillion tons of BPA was produced in just the USA alone. I mean, think of how many things we get from China. I didn't even look up how much they make. But that being the primary endocrine disruptor, that should really start sending off some red flags to us, and take a look at and start purchasing things on purpose that are BPA free. And I know that you go to the grocery store, you go to Costco, for God's sakes, and everything's lined in plastic. Your salad's in plastic bags, and your apples are all encased in plastic, and the carrots are in a plastic bag. I mean, I get it. There's so much plastic in this world, and we know the oceans are full of it. And I could go on and on about plastic and BPA, but this one is such a huge endocrine disruptor. We also know it causes cancers and things like that. So you got to pay attention to it. Unfortunately, in America, cosmetics are really big endocrine disruptors. If you're not paying attention to how the clean, lotions and potions and things you're putting on your body with fragrances and all the nasty chemicals, there's about 2,200 that are okay in the United States that aren't okay in any other country, especially Europe, that we put on our skin, and that's absorbed in 26 seconds, which is just wild. And there tends to be a lot of heavy metals and like paints and things from China. Roundup, glyphosate. Oh my gosh, I always say glyphosate, and I know I say it wrong, but it's the Roundup. It's the chemicals that are sprayed on our foods that are also chemical and endocrine disruptors that we really need to pay attention to. So you are someone right now that's like, I know my estrogen and my progesterone are off. I don't even need to draw my blood. I don't need to do the saliva test. I have all the things that have been listed in those slides. Pay attention to this. Pay really close attention to what's going on. Pay really close attention to what stress you're allowing into your life. Choose really wisely there and figure out what you can do to stop that cycle. Calm your body down, meditation, things that are going to help your body reduce the stress that's there and start to get some of that balance back. And rest at night is, my God, the number one thing that you can do above all is go to sleep and sleep well, and make sure you have that full night's rest. If you're somebody who has hormones that are off, you're like, oh my gosh, but I have insomnia because my hormones are off and it's really difficult. Those are times when you're going to want to meditate. And you and I are going to have a different conversation as well as a patient in my office, if that's what you choose to do, because there's a lot of things that we need to take a look at based on scans and the neurology, that hardwiring that might be there, that's going to make a really big difference. The liver, I had to throw this one in there because of all those endocrine disruptors. Your liver has to detox everything, but it also has to get rid of the free estrogens that are in your body. And if it is overwhelmed with chemicals and it is overwhelmed with all the other crap in the world that we put, that are, inhaled, ingested in our body, our liver starts to get backed up. And one of the number one things we'll have people do is clean the liver. That needs to happen like every 6 months. Clean it out. Even if you're a really clean person, you may not have grown up that way. You may have grown up with medicines, and you may have grown up with, bologna and white bread and what is that stuff called? Miracle Whip and Brunswiger. I'm just listing things that I literally did. Kraft mac and cheese and antibiotics. That's kind of what I grew up on. Clean that liver out, give it a break, let it rest, let it breathe, let it get rid of all the other things. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that liver that's really, really important. So make sure you take great consideration to that. And there's so many professionals that can help you with detoxing a liver that you can look up. People that you can get with, people that have done it before. When you find a really great cleanse, stick with it, but then also knowing when you're stripping your body of nutrients to build it back up. That's highly, highly important. Don't just strip your body when you're starting to detox, because it can strip it of really good things too. You need to get that thing built back up. So things like probiotics and gut repair and supplementation and lots of lovely leafy greens and omega-3s and vitamin D. Let your body get built back up the way that it needs to, and paying attention to not adding more chemicals in the future, paying attention to all the other things I talked about, and paying attention to this guy called the vagus nerve. So this one is kind of the big culmination of stress in our body. If you remember when I looked way back on parasympathetic and sympathetic, and I said, take a look at that parasympathetic nervous system and that one big chain that I'm talking about, that's your vagus nerve. That's the one that connects all those organs and glands and gives that feedback, that hardwiring back to your brain, and runs that parasympathetic nervous system. That thing is such a big deal, you guys. Your vagus nerve is so important. And it's also one of the number one things that we see restricted in our office. And I am literally talking about neurologically restricted to your brain. It is perpetuating that cycle of stress. It doesn't have enough bandwidth to be able to handle the amount of stress that you're under. The tone is low. What's really cool is you can even read in medical journals about the vagus nerve and how important it is with tone and calming the stress response, and making sure that your brain and body are fully connected from that gut, from all of those organs and glands to feel calm and relaxed. Because we'll feel people will say, I've tried everything. I meditate, I do yoga, I've taken all sorts of supplementation and herbs, and I've taken, maybe they've even tried some medication. They're like, I've tried everything and I can't calm my body down. I'm still having these things, which is, the dysautonomia and the endocrine disruptions and the GI tract and the immune system that's all playing into this. But they're like, I just don't know what else to do. I just take all these supplements. I spend all this money. And we'll get inside of their body and run a nervous system scan and see that they have some huge restrictions in that vagus nerve. And what we'll often see, now you have to hear me out with this vagus nerve and where it's at. I actually might have it on the next slide here. I do. This is where your vagus nerve is. It is one of your 12 cranial nerves. So if you remember when I was talking about that cranium and what's going on there in that upper cervical area and near your brainstem, and that one big branch that was coming out to the parasympathetic, that's your vagus nerve. And you've got 12 cranial nerves that are taking in your nervous system in this upper area and swallowing, eyes, ears, nose, throat, mouth. You've got 2 that actually will leave your brain. They leave the cranial vault and they wander. Vagus means wandering, and that's the big one that goes out throughout those organs. It's got to leave in this upper cervical area, and your cranium plays a huge role into this as well. And you're going to want to just like scream when I tell you this, but we'll often see a restriction all the way back to the birth. Our brain is supposed to go through a nice little squeeze, like those cranial bones when you're coming out of the vaginal canal. It should do this nice little squeeze and then come back out in this beautiful little balloon. And what'll happen is there'll be some restrictions in that cranium. Sometimes there's assistance that's needed. Sometimes there's head tilting that's needed. Sometimes you have to pull. Sometimes the chin's wrong. Sometimes you're not even in the you're like face up, or you're a breech baby like I was. We're going to have some vagal nerve restriction. We're going to have some tone issues there. We'll also have some other cranial nerve things and, all sorts of other things that we can talk about just case by case basis that are going to be off that we don't realize from birth. And some real traumatic births. So we're going to see instantaneous, the colicky baby with the gut issues and a hard time, calming itself and crying all the time. So I have some of these things that are popping up on my screen. I don't even know what's happening. It is sometimes super obvious. And then there's other times we look back and say, there was a little bit of restriction. And it was a little bit restricted for a long enough time that now as a teen, when the endocrine cycle is super important because you're trying to grow all your lady parts, things start to be off. And from the teen years until your motherhood, adult life down to the grave, we know the hormones are off and we have horrendous hot flashes and we have horrendous menstrual cycles and mood swings and cravings and weight gain and water retention. And we're like, where did this come from? It may have just started in the birth process, and there's such a deficiency that's there, or a little bit of a deficiency that's there, that every other thing we did to build up stress in that physical, chemical, and emotional world has perpetuated that cycle, and over and over and over again, to get to a place that the sufficiency has been so low that our body can't maintain a beautiful hormone cycle like we need to. Can't maintain a mood, emotional regulation. I mean, there's so much that's going on that we start to develop even a different personality from when we were young. And I feel super grateful to be on the other end of that. And when I had my first scans, to see just how restricted that was, because I didn't know what I was going to do hormone wise with my body. I mean, I don't think my husband knew what he's going to do either, because I would have such huge different fluxes with estrogen and progesterone, to the point of like, you can't touch my boobs. Like, I can't even barely put a bra on. They were just swollen and inflamed. And my menstrual cycle, it was like, a super duper plus, and a pad wasn't getting me for the first hours, just like gushing blood. I mean, my hormones were atrocious before we got these scans and realized exactly what was going on. And it was in that upper cervical spine that needed the help, and how important it was. So if you remember that little bottom one that was down in the sacrum, right to the lady parts, how much that plays into the balance in this upper cervical area, because this area does the input. So even though I was having some irregularities and instability in my low back, I didn't even know I was having an issue in my upper cervical. Once we cleared this, my pelvis started to stabilize and menstrual cycle started to stabilize. And when I had found out, once we had started to change that hard wiring, we took a look at internally at the chemistry to see, okay, what's still off, what might be going on that's differently. And something that I had done that now, lost video. I don't know. I hope you're still on. I think it still says I'm counting. Shoot. Can you still see me? That we had to take a look at the blood chemistry, because I had just from some trauma previously and some stillborns I didn't want to be, I'm frozen. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I had a tubal ligation, and that throws a whole monkey wrench into the hard wiring and what sort of thing needs support. And so what we ended up doing is getting some whole food supplements that support your own ovaries and your own thyroid and your own uterus and your own pituitary and hypothalamus to regenerate and grow and replenish itself. Which has been really, really important for me, especially since I did cut that hard wiring. But I have women who have had endometriosis and lost an ovary. I mean, we've got some women that are able to work it out and figure their body's able to balance itself, which is usually for me one of the biggest messages that I want to tell people is that our bodies are designed to self-heal and to self-regulate. They are designed to be healthy. We've got to give it the right opportunity. We got to put it in the right environment. We need to make sure the hard wiring's there. That way that the blood chemistry can be right. And really, I say chiropractic care is not it's not a treatment for anything. It's not somebody, might come to me because their hormones are off, and it is not a treatment for that. Instead, it's a way to put your body into a healing mode so that it can self-heal and self-regulate, so that it can be healthy, so that it can start to repair and stabilize that hormone cycle. And my gosh, just to watch the changes in young girls and women get their life back is really rewarding to me, because I want them to have a joyful life. I want them to have a great experience. I want them to have energy to give back to others, because that's really what this world is about right now. I mean, I think that we could all say the world's pretty stressful and people end up being really, restricted and with themselves. They don't have energy to give back to others. And the world needs the best us. They need the best you. They need the best me, so we can give energy back to other people and for them to encourage them to change their lives. So that's why we do chiropractic care. That's why I teach these webinars. I want people to be empowered to make really good decisions and see it from a bigger lens than really hyper-focused on just one issue, just one symptom, just one diagnosis, and look to see my body can heal. It can self-heal. It can self-regulate. Sometimes you got to give it time, because you don't know how long that stress cycle has been there. But your body is designed to be healthy and heal. Okay, I'm glad you can see me now, Nikki. I don't know what happened there. I'm hoping that the video goes through for everybody else. But for those of you who have any questions, you can type them in that chat box. People who aren't patients at my office, you can click on this VIP pass. So there'll be an offer at the end of this too, to come in and get those scans and sit down and chat and figure out what might be going on, so you can take a global look at the hard wiring in your body and get a better, get a higher life experience. That's really what we're all about. I don't know if you missed anything, Nikki, but I know that I'll see you and you can ask me as well. And so, because some people ask, well, how do you check, if you do blood work or if you do any cortisol looks or saliva tests. We do have some review systems that we go over that's pretty lengthy. It's like 236 questions to take a look at if you need some other actual secondary organ support, like ovaries and uterus and thyroid, pituitary, things like that. So thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to see you all very soon. And I hope you guys all have an amazing, beautiful, wonderful hormone cycle that can be balanced, and you can be your best self.